Today we're going to find out what is a fascist. Now, the interesting thing is that nobody really knows what that word means, and not anymore. And what that word means is complicated. A lot of people want to say that fascism or a fascist is somebody who's a right-wing person who abuses the public, or abuses the rights of the public. That's not true. And where the term fascism originates from goes far beyond Benito Mussolini. And it's not a left or right thing. So where do we start but where the term fascist actually comes from? Now, far back, when Rome was still a republic, what the fascist was the guards and soldiers of the Roman Senate held these things called fasces. And what fasces were bundles of ceremonial sticks, basically symbols of power. They were the symbol that the Roman consuls could bind the power of everybody together into a fasces, which is why the word fasces and faggot sounds very similar. And the consul holding the fasces essentially had the most power of any politician in Rome. And there was always two consuls, but only one of them ever held the fasces at one time. They would usually alternate the power between each other. And that's why it is correct to say that, for all intents and purposes, a fascist is somebody who abuses power. The thing is, that's not a quality exclusive to the right wing. And in today's society, it's not a quality most emulated by the American right wing. It's in fact a quality that is most strongly present in the American left. Now, Benito Mussolini, the guy who basically created modern fascism, was formerly a staunch socialist. So he was never a right-wing guy. Now, in order to really explain why this matters, I have to explain to you the original right and left wings, so to speak, of the way politics were in the Republic of Rome. Which is to say that for the most part, besides everybody being in business for themselves, there was kind of two means of operating as one of these very many corrupt senators of Rome. Very few of which were not possessing of any corruption whatsoever. Almost all of them were deeply corrupt. There were populists and there were conservatives. And usually what a conservative is not entirely different in the vaguest sense from in a modern American conservative. Conservatives generally try to respect the old institutions. For the Romans, it was respecting the aristocracy. For Americans these days, it's respecting the religious, respecting the rich, and respecting the powerful in business. Which is, again, to respect the rich here. Now, what a populist was somebody who looked out for all the little people. And for a time, for just a decade or two in America, it really was the liberals looking out for the little people. And the conservatives mostly were only looking out for little people insofar as those little people were also conservative in their own mindset, which is respecting of tradition, respecting of specific old values, respecting of, religious institution, and respecting of the powerful. In Rome, it was entirely possible to become a powerful senator even if you didn't come from the aristocracy. It was just much, much harder because for them, just like us, you needed a lot of fucking money to move up. And where you got that money, it didn't necessarily have to come from your own wealth, but you had to have wealthy allies one way or the fucking other, or you weren't going to get very far. But still, there were famous, powerful senators who never reached the heights of power, but got power got to some serious powerful positions coming from poverty. So that was part of why, you know, we emulate their style in a lot of ways. Where originally, in its under its best circumstances, you don't have to be a career politician to become a president or a judge. Now, that is why it was usually only the highest level guys who had the most power and the most interest in conserving that power, which is why, you know, we think of the consuls as having the utmost ability to get their own way, to exercise their authority over people who don't agree with them, and to wield that power in being a fascist. So, really what being a fascist is to wield power. And I guess in the way the parlance we have it is, the people who wield power against the little man is what we would normally call a fascist. And its revival in American lexicon, and particularly in the 60s, like, you're a fascist, man, it was just when the peace-loving beatniks and hippies were getting bullied around by the state. They considered an abuse of power. You can't tell me you can't smoke weed, man. You can't tell me I can't have free love, man. I should be able to go around in public shirtless, man. And, you know, maybe the hippie was fucking right. But what they called the fascist was somebody who abused authority. But too quickly, just through sheer use of propaganda, we started to regard a fascist as just a right-wing authoritarian. And eventually, in today's modern society, we call just conservatives fascists, because Trump has been very rightly so called a populist candidate, as in that he threw his finger to the establishment, he threw his finger to seated long-running senators of both the Republican and Democrat majorities. He was hated perhaps more by Republicans than he ever was by any Democrats, and it seems to have completely escaped notice of our American public that Trump was a lifelong Democrat who had basically supported both Clinton campaigns, but for some reason, and maybe it was racist, I don't know, probably not entirely, I can't imagine exactly why, but he turned on Obama. That was about the extent of anything I could really say was emblematic of racism, and anything I know about Trump was basically just the way he continued the birther controversy, which was started by the Clinton campaign in 2008, by the way. So anyway, without going on too long for that digression, you got a guy who, while Hillary Clinton ignored the unwashed masses and spent most of her time touring banker summits and shit like that, Trump was out holding rallies in front of the people. So it's a bit bizarre that a culture that thinks of exclusively conservatives as fascists to use the term fascist, which means an abusive authoritarian, usually a conservative. They'd use it on a guy who is a populist, who at least in Roman times, and really in most, if not all political cases, the populist is not a conservative, and also not typically one to abuse the smaller in society, because a populist derives his power from the plebs, from the plebeian class. So it's just really fucking bizarre that anybody calls Trump a fascist, because that's not what a fascist is. Now, the real interesting thing is part of the reason why I have moved far, far further to the right of where I used to be, is because politics in general has moved not to the left or right. That's a fucking lie. That's a false dichotomy. Politics has shifted from just left and right, although it was never just left and right, and tilted more and more and more to like this, where politics has been the authoritarian to the libertarian. Now, usually, it's quite fair, quite honest to attribute populism to libertarianism, because libertarian simply means less authority, more freedom. What it means is the government should have as little power and as little reach as is necessary to govern and keep order and peace in a nation. That the government, and some libertarians think the government should downright not fucking exist. A lot of them think that the government shouldn't even maintain public works or roads or any of that shit. I would never go that far. But I think when it comes to just the individual citizen, the government should never be able to tell you what you can and can't eat, who you can and can't date, who you can and can't marry, all sorts of other shit, what you can and can't say, what you can and can't buy, and what you can and can't sell. All of that shit is libertarian and technically populist, because usually it takes a significant amount of authority and a significant use of that authority, a wielding of the fasces, if you will, to make sure that you will be punished, in a lot of cases extremely severely, for doing something the state says you can't do, which is to say that the state, being authoritarian, tells you you can't, you can't do this, you can't do that. You can't say that on TV, you can't smoke that drug, all that shit. So a lot of times, it's been, for decades now, usually the liberals saying, okay, it's fucked up that we say these people can't marry, it's fucked up that we say that these people can and can't discriminate, we say, and that's technically, if you want to be really honest, anti-discrimination is an authoritarian law, not a libertarian law. Now, it generally is to the benefit of the public that people can't discriminate against them. However, that is the government wielding authority to say you cannot discriminate if you want to. It doesn't matter whether you want to or don't want to, you can't. So that's one thing that a lot of people don't seem to realize, is that, well, the left thinks of themselves as of the people, for the people, the little guy, but in the best interest of the little guy, or at least the purported best interest of the little guy, they have to wield authority the same as anybody else. You can't be free from that, or you can't have a government at all. So there's that. But the people who are more and more authoritarian, if we're, I think it's mirrored, so we got to go like this, right? Up here, the people who are in the authoritarian left have completely seized control. The liberals, who are the libertarian left, have no say in the left propaganda anymore. The people who say, hey, why don't we stay out of each other's business, have completely lost all of the say-so of the entire left wing to the people who say, if you say something I don't like, I will take your job, I will take your livelihood, I will ruin your fucking life. Okay? If you were even suspected of breaching our morality code, we will fuck you to the point that you're going to wish you were fucking dead. And they're the people who say, you can't buy that, you can't sell that, you can't say that, you can't watch that, you can't think that, you can't is authority, 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 authority. The overreach, overuse, and the vicious, punitive use of authority is what fascism is. So, you may think it sounds like an ignorant statement, but it is actually 100% correct to say, well, the leftists are the real fascists. Who are the people taking the big fucking stick, the fascies, and using it on you? Who? Be honest now. So that's why, for the people who are conservatives and interested in the conserving of values, the conserving of institutions, and the conserving of certain principles, the people you can blame for that are the people who, for 2-3 decades, particularly Reaganites and Bushites, who spent years focusing on using authoritarian means to conserve certain values, to the point where it was meaningless, useless, frivolous, and abusive. So now that conservatism is considered meaningless, stupid, abusive, and vicious, in general, when that is not true, there are institutions, values, principles, and cultures worth conserving. That's what the conservation means. To preserve, the same thing in this case. Now, the fact that the agendas of these religious fundamentalist lunatics and the Pat Buchanans and the Jerry Falwells of the world of the past 50 years ruined it for everybody, because now the very idea of conserving anything has fallen out of the public favor. Conserving values in general is now viewed as evil. So what has been replaced, the replacement for conserving of values, well, that would be the elimination of the very fucking idea of values, also called postmodernism, which is the mindset that gives birth to communism, feminism, social justice, and just basically every sort of just human degeneracy and horribleness. And these people think that the only way that we can continue destroying the value system and to continue to launch America into a state of pure debauchery and a rejection of responsibility and a rejection of tradition of any kind. Well, at the very least, there's a lot of people who are postmodernists who love tradition, as long as it's not that of white people, because postmodernism itself is corrupted in its original intention, mostly by vicious racists and hateful bigots, who are not actually of the mindset that eliminating of values is what's best for people. They don't actually think that at all. They just think the elimination of the culture of the people that they hate is what's best for people. And they happen to be quite very much in the interest of conserving their own ethnic groups, their own social groups and whatnot. So from the racial supremacist to the radical feminist to the Hollywood elite, they're all very interested in conserving the supremacy of their own values and cultures. So they're even a perversion of the fucking very thing that spawned them. But that is somewhat why fascism, in terms of the political sense, where it arose in modern times with Benito Mussolini, was a rather severe perversion of socialism, but was also born out of the extent to which socialism is extremely authoritarian, which is in that the state mandates the flow of money, the direction of industry, rather than the free market. So really, because currently American conservatives are interested in conserving constitutional law, which is extremely populistic, believe it or not, and interested in protecting the smallest among us and not the most powerful. That was the way it was designed, as a complete rejection of aristocracy, monarchy, and oligarchy. It is actually the conservatives, the reemergence of the constitutional conservatives of our time, the sort of the Ben Shapiro's, I know he's Canadian, but effectively Jordan Peterson is one of these types. A lot of these newer, more cool conservatives, for in the UK, Paul Joseph Watson would be one of these guys. They're populist conservatives because, believe it or not, freedom and the autonomy of the individual pleb, the smallest among us, the normal working class, is being conserved, preserved, and protected by the right. Meanwhile, the expansion of governmental authority and the abuse of said authority is being expanded as fast as humanly possible by the left. However, because the political mindset of the country and of the average person is just exceedingly ignorant and operating off of the inertia of decades and decades gone by, and extremely out of date, which is with what is actually happening in the here and now. They're operating off of 1999, where it was, or excuse me, more like 2001, where it was like, oh, hey, Bush is like Reagan on steroids, and what's his name? Why the fuck did I forget Bush's vice president? Dick Cheney is the pure embodiment of evil in the second coming of Henry Kissinger. Fucking yeah, that was the case then. And as far as conserving of the power of the rich, that is a unilateral thing, or excuse me, a bilateral thing, in that both the establishment, sort of the entrenched career politicians of both the left and right, are in the pockets of moneyed interest and not supporting the interests of the public. And part of the reason why monopolied moneyed interests, the bankers, the career politicians of both the left and right, the media, and every other entrenched, decrepit authority was anti-Trump is because Trump was the very first time that somebody who spoke their mind, who said fuck you to the system, who refused to scratch people's backs, and mostly paid his own way through his election instead of being bribed through the entire process, which is how America works. Campaign donations and PAC money is all bribes, essentially. The first guy to come in with not so many strings attached. He does very much have strings on him, but it's fewer strings than you've seen on a puppet in a hot minute. The reason why he was so unilaterally, yes, I mean at this time, rejected and assaulted with intensive libel and slander is because he's terrifying. Because he is an example of a self-made man with self-made money getting into the biggest, most powerful position in the nation while saying deliberately, explicitly, fuck you to the moneyed, entrenched, corrupt, and decrepit systems of power. And yet all these people who claim to be against the system, man, against the societal systems, man, against systems of oppression and power, were extremely easy to convince that the system of societal power, the fucking golem of evils of all the past, the most corrupt and selfish actor in the entire situation, was the one who was actually the least. Isn't that hilarious? That who is arguably the least fascist politician to become president in decades, perhaps in centuries, is the one that the so-called for the people, by the people, looking out for the oppressed and downtrodden are screaming about. Because progressives, social justice warriors, feminists, and communists, all of the radical left, are fucking stupid. The only thing the only quality they have that exceeds their evil is their ignorance and stupidity. They don't know that that's the way things really work. And this is why they don't just autistically screech about Trump. They autistically screech about anybody to the right wing. As Democrats constantly work against the interests of the people, against the interests of the poor especially, against the interests of racial minorities, and against the interest of women, with the exception of, I guess, in fucking can or can't you have an abortion, which is far more complicated issue than just a left or right thing. But for the most part, the enemy of these people, at least of what they say they're for, these people, the enemy is of themselves is who they support. And it's just hilarious that that's the way it is. Because another one of the things is the more and more you would look into welfare, and the activity of just giving the poor free shit is sort of bizarre in this country, in that it's usually abused. It's usually given to people who don't need it. And it's given in a country where our poor are far richer than 99% of the world, literally. Our poor are disgustingly rich compared to the poor of just about any other nation. And in America, I mean. And, most of our poor people have cell phones, internet access, they have cars, air-conditioned homes. And it's sort of odd how much money we do put into welfare, but they think that because so many conservatives are not rich, and that supposedly conservatism is the party of the rich, which is only true in that, yeah, conservatives are the party of the rich, and so are the Democrats. All the neocons and the neoliberals are the same thing. They're corporate, and in the pocket of the rich. So because the conservatives think that welfare is actually not in the public's best interest. Not just, it shouldn't be a tax burden to people who do pay their taxes. It's more than that. They think that it's actually bad and sustains and entrenches poverty rather than helps people get out of it. And I think they have a strong case for that being true. Not for all people. I don't think welfare programs should be abolished, but I think that they should be strict. And, of course, a lot of conservatives agree with that. But just the fact that anybody should want to say anything other than give more free money is conservative and therefore fascist. It's not really the case. I consider, fascism to be what's in service to the elite, to the rich, and to the controllers of society. And usually the way people control society is to control the media, to control what the society can and can't consume, to control how the society can and can't act, including things like gun control, limiting your ability to defend yourself, is very fascist. And really, when I look at the tally overall, when you go policy by policy of who's acting in service of fascism, it's Democrats, 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 and then conservatives here and there. And that's not always been the case, which is why it was so common to call people like Bush a fascist, because he was one. And so common to call Reagan a fascist, and common to call what's his name? Fucking Tricky Dick. What's his name? Fucking why can't I remember his fucking name? Richard Nixon was a fascist. Yeah, that's what fascism means. Conserving of power. Basically, it means conserving of power, which is how it's easy to confuse fascism as in just conserving, which is not true. It's conserving and hoarding and then use and abuse of power is what fascism is. And Trump is not doing it. And the best case they can usually try to think of him being abusive is he's deporting illegal immigrants. Well, legal immigrants aren't citizens of the United States, and rights and in your free monies, your free shit, your socialism shit, it's for citizens. And I would say that when it comes to Europe, where people are very much to the detriment of the public, way, 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 way further authoritarian left than anything the United States or Canada has ever seen. They're flooding their country with immigrants from barbarian nations without the consent of the public, because the public in these countries has no say in comparison to America, where our representative republic is far, far, far more beholden to the will of the people than anywhere else in Europe. So, you may think, well, it's weird to call Europe fascist because Europe's so much further left than America. Yeah, isn't that ironic? That they abuse authority against the will of the people every chance they fucking get, at the expense of the money, the taxes, the time, the rights, and the safety of their citizenry. They abuse their authority to spite citizens in order to flood the gates with barbarians on purpose. But America, of the people, by the people, for the people, we're the fascists. Uh-huh. Yeah. I don't think so. I think you actually have it ass backwards there, friend. I think you're completely wrong. So, the too long didn't watch. The left is the real fascists. It's not up for debate. It's a fact. The left are the real fascists. Sorry.